Welcome to another edition of Eye on the Issues. Today we are talking to Wyoming Congresswoman Harriet Hageman. Congresswoman, thank you for taking time to talk to me. We're only days away, of course, from the election from November 5th. How are you feeling? Let's start with about the presidential race.
I'm feeling very good about it. The fact is that it's clear that the momentum is on President Trump's side. The rallies that he's having, the enthusiasm that we're seeing, the fact that he's going to New Mexico and some of the states that I think people thought would not even be in play. I mean, it's just amazing, the stamina that he has. I also really enjoy his sense of humor, and I enjoy the way that he is engaging and connecting with the people. I was with him just a couple of weeks ago at the rally in Aurora, and there were 12,000 people there. And I can assure you that it is every walk of life, it is every demographic. And these people are more enthusiastic than I have ever seen in my entire history in being involved in politics.
Now, give me your reaction, if you could, to Donald Trump, billionaire Donald Trump, putting on a safety vest, driving around in a garbage truck after Joe Biden's comments a couple days ago.
Well, you know what's funny is you look at what Joe Biden does, and you look at Kamala Harris, and they are just simply incapable of staying on message because they don't have a North Star. They don't know what their message is. They can't return to what it was they were talking about because they don't remember. And so they are prone to saying things that get them into a lot of trouble, just like we saw with that. Well, what the mainstream press would like to do is shove it under the rug and say, oh, there was an apostrophe in there. I don't know. I've never heard anybody put an apostrophe into a speech. That seemed like such a bizarre thing to say to try to salvage that situation. But they want to shove it under the rug. By doing that, Donald Trump is able to keep that in the news and forcing the mainstream media to actually cover it. Obviously, we would see it on Fox News. You would read about it on Breitbart. You would have a comment on it on your show. But the mainstream media wants to ignore it, and they want to move away from it as quickly as they can. And because he's so good at trolling them, they're not able to.
And let's talk about the rest of the election that many people are focusing on. Let's begin with the U.S. Senate.
Well, I'm pretty excited about what is going on there. I've been watching. I actually went and campaigned for Bernie Moreno in Ohio, and I think that he has a very strong chance of taking that seat. That would be just an absolutely fantastic development. The reality is that Ohio is a conservative state, and why they have put up with their senator for as long as they have is kind of a mystery to me. They need to have better representation, and I think Bernie's going to deliver there. I think what we see with Ted Cruz, they talk about what's his bucket down in Allred, down in Texas. He doesn't stand a chance. He is a radical. I'm just really excited that he's going to be out of the House of Representatives. And I think you're seeing movement in the Senate race in Nevada with Sam Brownback. I mean, I just think that people are moving in the right direction, if you will. And I'm excited about what we're going to learn at 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock on Tuesday evening.
And how are you feeling about the U.S. House races?
I feel strong there as well. Last week, I went and campaigned with Steve Scalise. We went to Southern Texas with Monica De La Cruz and Mayra Flores. We also campaigned in Arizona for a couple of incumbents that are fantastic members of the House of Representatives, Juan Ciscomani and Mr. Schweikert. So we were able to get out there and connect with the people. We were also did another border visit and met with the Border Patrol down there, and also met with the czar, the Texas czar on border control. He was fantastic, had a lot of really good information that we need to know, including the fact that there's a lot of different numbers that are floating around out there about how many illegals have crossed in the last 3.5 years. The official numbers coming out of the Biden-Harris administration is that there are 12 million illegals that have crossed into this country. Now, I think it's much higher than that, and I think most people think it's much higher than that. That does include 2 million gotaways. In other words, the people that didn't even stop and the ones that really do want to do some bad things when they come into the country. So the official numbers coming out of Biden and Harris administration is at least 12 million people have crossed illegally in the last 3.5 years.
Yeah, I've heard speculation that numbers could be closer to 20, but let's shift our focus, if we could, back to the cowboy state. And let's talk about what key initiatives are you working on in Washington that will benefit your home state?
So, what I really do focus on is our legacy industries and pushing back against this administration's radical policies. As we've seen from day one, when they took office in January of 2021, they have focused on destroying our ag industry and they have focused on destroying our energy industry. So, two of the things that you absolutely have to have for a civilized society is affordable, reliable energy and affordable food. And so right now we've been dealing with these inflationary numbers that have been off the charts. I lived through the Jimmy Carter years. I remember the Jimmy Carter years very, very well. And he dang near broke every farmer and rancher in the country because of the high interest rates and the inflation that we experienced at that time. And then you get Kamala Harris and Joe Biden in there, and they adopted exactly the wrong policies at exactly the wrong time, printing money like madmen, and then going out and spending massive amounts of government subsidies for things that are bad policies. So I really focus on trying to roll back the things that they're trying to do with NEPA. I just had a wonderful meeting today, learned a lot, and moving forward with some ideas to try to block them from breaking our small independent oil and gas producers because of their outrageous bonding requirements that they are attempting to put into place. I want to protect our cattle industry, especially from the radicalism of the 30 by 30 plan. The 30 by 30 plan being this idea that they're going to protect or conserve, they won't ever define those terms, 30% of our surface estate by 2030. They claim that there's only 300 million acres right now that are so protected, and they need another 400 million acres. That's a footprint the size of Wyoming and Montana and Nevada and Arizona and Utah combined. I mean, it's incredible what they're trying to do in terms of putting off limits our ability to be energy independent and food independent. So those are the things I really focus on with my committee work, as well as the bills that I have introduced and co-sponsored.
And speaking of committee work, you're on the House Judiciary Committee. How does somebody like you being on that committee benefit Wyoming?
Well, because of my background, 34 years as a trial attorney, and primarily focusing and pushing back against the administrative state. And that has been one of the priorities we've had, especially with my subcommittee on administrative law and regulatory reform. Thomas Massey is the chairman of that particular subcommittee. And what we have focused on is the Administrative Procedure Act. So we've had quite a few different hearings, bringing in experts who have described the abuses that these administrative agencies have imposed upon the American people. You know, an example being the SEC and the FTC consistently using administrative law judges to try to rig the cases against anybody that they go after. We have focused on what can we do in terms of addressing standing issues? What can we do to try to take that power away from these regulatory agencies and put it back where it belongs with the legislative branch? Why is that important in Wyoming? Because again, 48% of our surface estate is owned by the feds, 65% of our mineral estate. What we have to deal with the EPA, the BLM, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Commerce, Department of Energy. I mean, all of these three-letter agencies have a huge impact on our ability to access and develop and produce our resources. And so everything we're doing almost seems to have a federal nexus. So the work that I've done on the Judiciary Committee is to try to right that ship and get us back to our constitutional foundation of separation of powers.
Now, of course, we have 2 months left this year, but let's talk, if we can, for a second about 2025. What do you see as your priorities and the nation's really priorities being next year?
I think a lot of the things that we have already teed up. So the House of Representatives has already passed over 800 bills in the last 2 years, but only 117 of them have become law because we can't get the Senate to take them up, and then we haven't had the White House. So HR 1, which is the very best energy security and energy policy bill that has ever passed the House of Representatives, I want to move forward with that. That ensures that we can continue to access our oil and gas resources, our uranium resources, and our coal resources. HR 2, the very best border security bill that has ever passed the House of Representatives. Again, it would be building the wall. It would be making sure that we are actually adopting and implementing border security. you'll notice that the Democrats always want to talk about immigration reform. Immigration reform or immigration issues and border security are two separate issues. We need to have border security before we ever talk about immigration reform or bringing in millions more people. As far as immigration reform itself, why in the world would we have a diversity lottery? That's just silly. Why do we have this idea that we think that we have to bring in people from third world countries and that they're going to assimilate into our society and that all of this is going to be a kumbaya moment? We know that that isn't true. We see the pressures on these smaller communities and in a state like Wyoming when you're bringing in massive immigrants, massive illegal aliens, and even the ones that they're doing through the lottery and the chain migration. All of that stuff does need to be resolved and addressed, but first we need to have border security.
Mhm. Let's talk for a moment about energy independence. Before Donald Trump's first term ended, we were talking about energy independence as a nation. Then Joe Biden, Kamala Harris took over, and then now there's a chance of that shifting back. How important is energy independence to the American people, and what's it going to take to get us there?
So under Donald Trump, it was the first time we had been energy independent since the 1940s. And I have lots and lots of articles and statements being made by policy leaders out of Washington, D.C. saying it is impossible to be energy independent. The United States will never be energy independent. We just need to stop talking about that. Well, Donald Trump proved that that is not true, that we in fact can be energy independent. And the way that I describe it is that a weak America makes for a very dangerous world. As long as we are a strong country and determining our own destiny by doing things like producing our own affordable, reliable energy, producing our own affordable and reliable food, as long as we are doing things, it disempowers dictators and despots around the world. So in the last 3.5 years, Iran has made $110 billion selling oil on the world market, because one of the very first things Joe Biden and Kamala Harris did when they took office was they lifted the sanctions against Iran. The Iranian leadership was on its knees at the end of the first Trump administration, which meant that the people of Iran could finally be free of the dictators that have run that country since 1979. There was a light at the end of the tunnel. And then what does Joe Biden do? He comes in and he broke it. And by doing that, what he's done is he has empowered one of the worst administrations and one of the most tyrannical and destructive administrations in world history, being the Iranian regime that's in power right now. Look at Russia. Russia felt completely empowered to invade Ukraine. Part of why? Because they're selling their oil and gas to China. They're making massive amounts of money on it. He greenlit the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Venezuela, they're emptying their prisons and they're making money hand over fist because we're having to buy their oil. So if you are energy independent and America is strong and we are stable, the rest of the world follows suit.
And one of the pieces of the puzzle for energy independence is still, from a limited standpoint anyhow, nuclear energy generation. Talk to me about your vision for that in America going forward, and then the smaller nuclear reactor that's currently underway in Wyoming.
So that's an interesting question. And the fact is that Wyoming has some of the highest quality, highest reserves of uranium in the United States. And there's an operation up in northeastern Wyoming right now that I have visited a couple of times. The mining is done very differently than it was, several decades ago. It's done in situ. You very seldom even handle the material at all. They are pretty impressive operations. And by one of the things that Congress did do and that was passed is we placed a moratorium against purchasing uranium from Russia. And so that helps our independent and our domestic producers because they don't have Russia flooding the market every time they kind of get a toehold and can start producing that resource. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the small nuclear reactor over in western Wyoming. I'll be very honest with you. I'm not a huge fan of the federal government giving Bill Gates $2 billion, which is a minimum of what they have given him for that project. I don't like those kinds of subsidies that you see with that. And but at the same time, we'll see if that's going to work. I hope that it does. I think that that will provide more reliable energy than what we have seen with the wind and solar, clearly. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out.
In respect to Wyoming possibly being a location for nuclear waste storage, how do you feel about that?
I have not heard that discussion at all. I don't know if that discussion has taken place. I don't know that I can answer it because that just really has not been something that's been at the forefront of my mind in terms of anyone visiting with me about it.
Okay. And what is your stance on the development of wind and solar in respect to renewables around the state of Wyoming?
Well, I don't even refer to them as renewables. I think they're largely unreliable. And I really dislike the industrialization that we're seeing of all of our open spaces in Wyoming. One of the things that I always look at and talk about is the unit of energy produced per unit of land needed. And for a solar facility, it requires 30 times more land than it does for a traditional gas-fired power plant. And I think that that's what you really need to think about is we're not making more land. And so you really need to think about whether that's the highest and best use for that resource. Also, you don't have wind and solar without steel. You don't have wind and solar without concrete. Yet what they're trying to do is destroy our traditional energy resources that can actually produce steel and concrete and replace them, but they're not replacing them because they're only replacing or looking at the electric side. They're not really looking at the production side. You cannot produce steel without metallurgical coal. You cannot produce concrete without coal because there's nothing, they don't burn efficiently enough or hot enough to be able to produce those resources. So to me, the war that we're seeing on oil and gas and coal, and people will say, well, this is a transition. Well, there is no such thing as a transition. They're trying to shut down these facilities, number one. But number two, they're making it so cost prohibitive to operate them that you can't operate them to produce what we need right now. And that's where, when you have bureaucrats that are making decisions who really don't know what they're doing, but they're pursuing a political agenda rather than a policy agenda, this is the kind of mess that you get into. I'm not a huge fan of solar and wind. I think it's massive amounts of money and subsidies for propping up what I say are largely unreliable and terribly expensive energy resources. And I think from an efficiency standpoint, from a reliability standpoint, I struggle with it. And it's why I'm constantly kind of going after Rocky Mountain Power, because year over year over year over year, they're going to keep coming back and asking for rate increases. And it's in large part because they've gone down this road of what I would describe as green nonsense. And who are ultimately going to pay the price for that are our people, our farmers, who aren't going to be able to afford to operate their Sutter pivots, and people whose electric bills are just skyrocketing because they have to do redundancies and double up on every energy resource that we have, or electric resource that we have, I guess you'd say. I just think we need to use more common sense.
Yeah, common sense is a good idea. Can you tell me a little bit about your concerns regarding the Biden administration's, their BLM, obviously, their Western solar plan?
I don't think it's a good idea at all to cover our BLM lands with solar panels for the very reasons that I just described. If you want to actually produce something that generates revenue, which would be oil and gas, mining, and grazing, those are what produce revenue. Grazing is one of the most efficient ways to produce food that there is, and beef protein is one of the very best proteins available to us. It's why we have seen the increase in life expectancy that we have. It's why you see the innovation that you have in the United States. It's one of the most efficient ways to use our federal lands in the Western United States, and they're going to displace prairie and pasture and beautiful open space and cattle and wild horses, and they're going to replace that with what I would describe as industrial zones that won't work most of the time and that are astronomically expensive. And I just think it's the wrong thing to do.
Give me a reaction to the median home price in the United States of America right now is well over $400,000. 4 years ago, it was closer to between $230,000 or $40,000. As a congresswoman and as a leader, give us your reaction to that, knowing that there are Americans out there that want to buy houses that might not be able to afford them.
Well, there's a couple of reasons for it. It doesn't surprise me that the number continuously goes up. One of the problems that you have, again, is that you have an administration that came in and started printing trillions of dollars and inflation shot through the roof. Then you've got a situation where the Fed's trying to get control of that, come in and start raising interest rates. So what you have is what I always say is that the government's always trying to fix its last solution. And this is the circumstance. They're constantly trying to fix their last solution to whatever the problem is that they identified at the time. But there's something that a lot of people don't understand about why housing costs have increased in the United States. And again, it goes back to failed federal policy. And that is the way that they have been managing our national forests. So under the 1897 Organic Act, our national forests were created and put within the Department of Agriculture because our timber was seen as a commodity. And the purpose of our national forest was to provide a continuous supply of timber and a continuous supply of water for states like Wyoming, where we're largely snow runoff states, snowpack states. And what has happened, especially starting with Bill Clinton and the roadless rule, is that the radical environmentalists and the Biden-Harris administration, the Obama administration, the Clinton administration, they've been trying to treat our national forests as though they're national parks or national monuments and have disallowed us from being able to harvest the trees and the timber and the lumber that we need for housing in the United States. So we import a lot of lumber from Canada, which is one of the reasons why housing costs are so high, which it all goes back to the failed management, again, starting with Clinton largely in terms of the failed management of our national forests. But when he put forward the roadless rule in 2001 to deny access, management, and use to 58.5 million acres of National Forest Service lands, that's why you've seen the catastrophic forest fires that we've seen in California, Montana, Washington, Wyoming, Utah, etc. But it's also why you've seen the housing costs go through the roof, and it's why we've had the terrible pine and spruce beetle outbreaks that we've had. Our national forests are very unhealthy because of bad policies coming out of Washington, D.C. But not only are we burning them to the ground or rotting them to the ground, we're losing those valuable resources that we could be harvesting, generating jobs, economic development for our local communities, and then actually building the houses that we need.
Understood. Last question. What do you like most about living in Wyoming?
The people, how beautiful it is. I love the people of Wyoming. I love how beautiful my state is. It's part of why I really don't like it being covered with windmills and solar panels. I love the sunrises and the sunsets and the clouds, the wide open spaces. I love the freedom that we have in Wyoming. I think Wyoming is one of the last best places where you can truly understand why our forefathers did what they did in framing the Constitution the way that they did. I believe very much in responsibility and freedom. I think they're two sides of the same coin. I will be responsible for myself, but I want the freedom to be able to take care of myself and my family. I don't need the federal government telling me everything that I need to do to survive. In fact, I think I'm a lot better at it than what they could do for me. And I think we saw that during the COVID hysteria and those kinds of things. Wyoming is just really one of the most beautiful places on planet Earth. I'm incredibly honored to be able to represent the state of Wyoming. I spend every waking moment thinking about ways in which I can protect it, because I think if we protect Wyoming and we carry out the promises here, we can do it across the country, and we can reclaim the United States to be that great shining city on the hill that we all feel that it should and could be.
Understood. And yeah, I consider Wyoming to be a treasure of sorts for this nation.
Mm-hmm.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Folks out there, if you want to find out more about what's going on around the state of Wyoming, it's wyliberty.org. Thank you again, Congresswoman. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.